what eating disorder was like throughout history. Have you ever wondered what the silent echoes of eating disorders sound like throughout the corridors of history? Were these struggles unique to modern society? Or have the whispers of body image and self-perception been around through the ages? Come along as we explore these stories and find out what history can tell us about eating disorders. Ancient times. So, back in ancient Egypt, people had their own struggles with how they ate and what they looked like. If we peek into the old writings from that time, it's pretty clear they worried about their bodies just like we do today. Those ancient writings, like old notes, tell us that people then were dealing with issues similar to our modern concerns about body image and food. In ancient Egypt, folks wrote down their thoughts, and these notes show us that they too grappled with how they looked and what was considered acceptable. So the idea of wanting to fit in and be seen as attractive isn't something new. It's been around for a long time. Besides personal worries, what others thought about their bodies also mattered to the people of ancient Egypt. They tried hard to match what was seen as beautiful or ideal, just like how people today might go on strict diets or try extreme methods to fit in. Back then, the wise people like priests were not just spiritual leaders but also healers. People who struggled with how they ate or saw themselves might have sought help from these wise leaders, looking for a balance between the physical and the spiritual. Even though we're talking about a really long time ago, the stories of those dealing with eating issues in ancient Egypt aren't so different from our own. The struggles with how we see ourselves and trying to meet certain expectations have been part of the human journey for a very, very long time. Ancient Rome. Let's take a stroll back in time to ancient Rome, around the 1st century AD. To get why eating was tricky in ancient Rome, we need to know what life was like. The Romans loved big, fancy feasts. And back then, the rich and mighty Romans had a peculiar way of dealing with their hearty feasts. After stuffing themselves at these extravagant banquets, they would purposefully make themselves throw up. Yep, you heard it right. It was a practice called vomitio. Strangely enough, they thought it was a smart move to keep their bodies in good shape. So picture this, a grand Roman feast with all the fancy food you can imagine. But instead of feeling guilty about overeating, they had this unique solution. Just toss it all back up. It's kind of like a bizarre way of hitting the reset button after a feast, ensuring they could keep enjoying the good stuff without worrying too much about the consequences. The whole vomiting thing might sound strange to us now, but back then it was considered a way to maintain what they thought was a healthy body. It's a peek into the past, showing us that the relationship between people and food has been quite complex for a very long time. Middle Ages and Renaissance. Now let's fast forward to the Middle Ages, where things took a bit of a spiritual turn. During this time, religious fasting was all the rage. But, and it's a big but, some folks went to extremes that make your modern-day diet plans look like a walk in the park. There were accounts of women who took fasting to a whole new level, to the point where they literally starved themselves to death. I know it sounds intense, right? These extreme fasters believed that denying themselves food was a direct route to spiritual enlightenment. It wasn't just about shedding a few pounds, it was about reaching a higher plane of existence through self-deprivation. This extreme fasting often got tangled up with something called religious hysteria. People were so committed to the idea that denying themselves food could bring them closer to the divine that things sometimes got a little out of hand. Now, imagine the Renaissance rolling in like a wave of change. This period brought a shift in how people thought about themselves, especially their bodies. The Renaissance was like a spotlight turning onto the human form, and suddenly there was a newfound interest in looking a certain way. However, understanding eating disorders during these times is like trying to read a faded manuscript. It's not that easy. People weren't talking about mental health or eating habits the way we do now. The focus was more on societal upheavals, survival, and the basics of life. As the Renaissance unfolded, so did a change in values. The ideal of a slender figure gained prominence. People started to care more about physical appearance, and the pressure to fit a certain mold began to grow. This shift hinted at a new way of thinking about bodies, but it wasn't a full-blown discussion on mental health or eating disorders. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, life was a mix of challenges and transformations. People faced scarcity, battled for survival, and then suddenly found themselves in a time where how you looked became a bigger deal. But understanding eating disorders in this period is like looking at a painting with missing details. The overall picture is there, but the specifics are a bit blurry. First medical description of anorexia. In 1689, the stage was set for a groundbreaking moment in the understanding of eating disorders, specifically anorexia nervosa. That's where Richard Morton enters, an English physician who deserves a nod for being a trailblazer in this medical journey. Morton documented the case of a 20-year-old patient, and his description is nothing short of haunting. He painted a vivid picture of this individual as a skeleton clad with skin. Just imagine that for a moment. A living, breathing skeleton wrapped in a layer of skin. It's an image that sends shivers down your spine. But Morton didn't stop there. He delved into the psyche of his patient. He observed that this poor soul had a distorted body image, seeing themselves as anything but what they truly were. Thinness became an obsession, a relentless pursuit that took a toll on both the body and the mind. In retrospect, this marks the genesis of our medical understanding of anorexia nervosa. Morton's observations laid the foundation for recognizing the complex interplay between body image distortion and obsessive thinness, paving the way for further exploration and comprehension of eating disorders in the centuries to come. The roots of our awareness run deep, and it all started with a 20-year-old skeleton in 1689. 19th century medical perspectives. Now let's jump into the 19th century, a time when things were starting to shift. Imagine a world where folks were beginning to take a closer look at eating disorders, but the understanding was still a work in progress. In 1873, a doctor named William Gull stepped onto the scene and coined the medical term anorexia nervosa. It was one of the first times someone used these words to describe a condition where people just didn't want to eat. But, and it's a big but, the way society looked at it was a bit different. Instead of seeing it as a medical thing, people often thought of eating disorders as more about morals than health. It's like they were saying, hey, it's not a sickness, it's more about people not doing the right thing. Imagine trying to explain a complex puzzle, but the pieces weren't all there yet. In the 19th century, the understanding of eating disorders was taking baby steps. They were recognizing that something was going on, but the full picture wasn't clear. People with eating disorders faced judgment rather than understanding. It was like society was still figuring out how to talk about these things without pointing fingers. So when we think about 19th century medical perspectives on eating disorders, it's like looking at an early chapter of a book. The characters are introduced and the plot is unfolding, but we're far from the resolution. The medical community was beginning to see the outlines of what we now understand, but societal views were lagging behind, caught up in moral interpretations rather than medical insights. Early 20th century. The 20th century was a pivotal period in our understanding and treatment of eating disorders, witnessing significant strides that reshaped the landscape of mental health interventions. In the 1970s, a key figure, Hilda Bruch, contributed profoundly to this field. She penned a noteworthy book filled with stories about individuals grappling with eating disorders, which not only shed light on the complexities of these issues, but also played a crucial role in raising awareness and deepening our insights. Moreover, as we stepped into the 1980s, a new therapeutic approach took center stage in the treatment of eating disorders: cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. This method, marked by its innovative blend of adjusting thought patterns and behavioral strategies, emerged as a leading force in tackling the intricate challenges associated with these disorders. CBT marked a departure from traditional psychoanalytic methods, offering a more targeted and versatile approach for therapeutic intervention. The intertwined narratives of Hilda Bruch's impactful contributions in the 1970s and the ascendancy of cognitive behavioral therapy in the 1980s epitomized the dynamic evolution in our understanding and treatment of eating disorders. Bruch's case studies not only brought these issues into sharper focus, but also served as a catalyst for increased awareness and empathy. Conclusions. Looking at these ancient practices, we see how much culture and the desire for a certain body shape were connected. Even though it might seem odd to us now, it was normal for them. Connecting the dots to today, we find that the pressures from society about how we should look and what we should eat have been around for a really long time. Recognizing this helps us understand that the struggles people face with food and their bodies have a deep history.